contains life-saving medications like ivermectin, Z-Pak, and antibiotics. Stock them before they block them.
Welcome back to the Skiff. I want to show you something. The Connecticut Sentinel, our editor Jackie Homan sent me this, and she said, you got to have this guy on. Pastor Jacob Dell of the Woodbury Congregational Church in Connecticut. Check out the article on the Connecticut Sentinel. That's ConnecticutSentinel.com, spelled with a C, the old revolutionary way. But he's with us today, and I'll bring him in now. Pastor, thanks for coming on this morning. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me on, Todd.
So I was really looking forward to talking to you because I'm a PK. You know, my dad was a Presbyterian minister for 42 years. I totally get where you're coming from. And I've seen a lot of this when I was up in Connecticut at some of the churches. But tell us the gist of your article, and then I want to go from there.
Well, the gist of the article is that I got tired of seeing these rainbow flags on churches up and down Main Street all across this country. I drove into West Hartford a couple of weeks ago, and there was a giant Progress flag flying from the flagpole. And it occurred to me, this is just debauchery. This is licentiousness. There has to be some way to stop this. And sure enough, in the Connecticut Constitution, in the first article, Section 3, even though there's the guarantee of the free exercise of religion, there's a clause there that says, provided churches are not engaged in licentious behavior. So that became the gist of my sermon last week, which the texts were from First Kings, where Elijah casts his mantle over Elisha and anoints him a prophet to take up the Jehovah's battle against idol worship. And then Jesus is basically doing the same thing with his disciples, sending them out with spiritual weapons. And I thought, the law really is a spiritual weapon that God gives us, that he's given us to wield. And our forefathers, Christian men who founded this Constitution state, wrote that into the law. I think they knew that religion could go sideways, and they wanted some restraint on it, even though they were very much pro free exercise and freedom of conscience and freedom of religion.
That is so refreshing to hear from a pastor. I have to say, it's shockingly refreshing. I had been, when I was up in Connecticut, going to a church in Fairfield, a Congregational Church, and they were left-leaning, very kind people, but one of they were talking global warming and all that, and I could kind of go along with that and tolerate it. But then one morning they got up and started preaching transgender, and I just said, this is not Christianity. And I confronted the pastor, and he got angry and I guess hurt in his mind, but that's not Christian. Mutilating children is not Christianity.
It's
right?
Absolutely not. It's actually Baalism, which is what Elijah was preaching against. I mean, we've gone full circle in our depravity here. And I think one of the things that really spurred me on to do this was just the Project Veritas video that came out last week that featured allegedly a pastor in Connecticut basically assisting a minor to obtain access to what's called a chest binder, which even the person on the video acknowledges is only for people over 18. And I thought, well, regardless of what you think about adults doing this, we're talking about something that is impacting minor children against the law. And when pastors are engaged in aiding and abetting law breaking, set aside whatever you think about this. That's just licentiousness. That's the very definition of disorder. And it's a threat to the orderly government and civil rule. And the Constitution, the highest law in the state requires the Attorney General, the state, to do something about it.
Connecticut is very special, but it's the cradle of liberty, and there's so many religious names on the towns here. Canaan, right. Bethlehem, because the people who immigrated here were trying to start the New Jerusalem or whatever, and I didn't realize you mentioned Baal, and I think that is everywhere. You saw it in the Olympics in France with the calf on the wall that they were worshiping or whatever. But the word cannibal comes from Canaan and Baal. I didn't know this. I mean, it's eating your children. It's the same thing you're talking about. It's fascinating when you dig into the history.
That's right. The cult of Cybele was a cult where the priests would castrate themselves and burn their genitals to the goddess. I mean, nothing is new. Nothing is new under the sun.
So tell us about what you're going to do. What's your progress or your way forward, I guess, on all this?
Well, I preached the sermon. It was probably one of the most sort of intense sermons I've ever preached. It got a good response from the congregation. And I've sent letters now to Attorney General William Tong asking him to act, to at least open an investigation into these churches. I'm told from the Connecticut Sentinel, which picked up this story, that they're aware of other churches that are engaged in the same kind of behavior. I sent a copy of that letter to Attorney General Tong, to Attorney General Pam Bondi, and also to the Religious Liberty Commission, whose opening hearing I attended last month in Washington, D.C. The free exercise of religion, as I said, does not give one the free exercise to sin. And what we have now is we have counterfeit faith, counterfeit religion, operating under the protection of the First Amendment with all the privileges that gives them, but it's diluting the stock, it's diluting the currency, if you will. Those of us who are preaching the true faith are being lumped in with these people who are fake, really preaching a fake version of Christianity, and now I think have crossed the line into just law breaking.
So the Congregational Church, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe back in the founding of the nation that there was kind of an agreement between the Presbyterians and the Congregationalists. The Presbyterians went south, Congregationalists were more up in the New England area. But you see a lot of rainbow flags on the Congregational churches, Black Lives Matter. I mean, what is that?
Well, I think that's typical of mainline Protestantism in this country, throughout, across the board, whether it's the Episcopal Church, the Presbyterian Church, the United Church of Christ, Unitarians. That's what you see. And I think, that goes way back. It has its roots, I think, in the fundamentalist modernist controversy in the 1920s, when J. Gresham Machen left the Presbyterian Church. And then fast forward through the 1960s, I think you see deliberate subversion of mainline Protestant pulpits through the seminaries, the kind of men and then later women they were turning out. Really did not believe in a supernatural view of the world. They did not believe in an inspired, authoritative biblical text. They were soft on things like the resurrection, and then that that opened the door even as early as the early 1970s to an embrace of homosexuality and alternative lifestyles and sexualities that took root in these churches. It took a generation or more for them to triumph, and here we are living with that moment right now.
So how do we, you're right, all the denominations, a lot of people are leaving I'm a Presbyterian, leaving PCUSA, going to more Orthodox versions.
This is a special report.
Knowing how to invest your money is harder than ever before. Dealing with stock market volatility, record debt, and terrorist attacks requires new thinking. At U.S. Asset Management, we can help you see the world more clearly so that you can move beyond the chaos and invest with confidence. Call us, visit us online, or drop by our office. U.S. Asset Management, helping you make better decisions with your money.
But it's a shame to abandon these church organizations. Can it be saved?
I think it can be saved. I think that these are tactics like what I'm exploring here with the constitutional avenue. Getting the state to take a look at these so-called churches may get them to actually reform themselves, or at least stop their most egregious things they're doing wrong. The other thing I'm looking at is donor intent. You have hundreds, in the case of these old churches, you've got hundreds of years of bequests and wills and money that's been given over the years, endowments that are worth millions, land that was purchased and given for the purposes of maintaining a Christian church. There's an example I like to use in Bridgeport, where the first Congregational Church of Bridgeport was sold to become a mosque. Now, I realize that churches go defunct and people move away, neighborhoods change, and you may not necessarily be able to support all these old historic churches, but I can guarantee you that the people who gave the money to build that church in the last century did not intend for it to be a mosque. And so, I think that there's probably a whole class of beneficiaries out there, heirs, who would be able to make a claim against these churches whenever they're up for sale, whenever there's a transaction, just based on the grounds that this is not what my ancestors intended. They did not intend to see a rainbow flag. They did not intend to see something other than Christianity preached from here. And so if there's going to be these kinds of transactions, then I think a class exists that can claw back some of that money. And what I would like to do is see some of that money that's clawed back, A, go to the heirs, but B, go into a trust that can raise up godly men, train them in a biblical seminary, and then put them back into these historic pulpits and fund them and give them the money that they can actually make a living preaching the gospel.
Wow, we want to help you with that because my family got off the boat. They're buried in Middleton. They ended up going all over the country. But I'm one of those ancestors, so I want to help you.
You're one of the heirs potentially. Yeah.
So attendance, you mentioned, I think Jackie mentioned, or you did in the
Mhm.
article, has increased in churches that actually do preach the Bible, and they are declining in places that don't. Are you seeing that in your experience?
You'll always find the exception that proves the rule. So I'm sure there's some liberal megachurch out there that's preaching the rainbow dogma, and they're packed to the gills. But for the most part, yeah, these mainline churches that have gone liberal and gone woke are dying. And some of the projections that I've seen is that they're in the Episcopal Church that the last Episcopalian's already been born, right? That there won't be any by 2050. Now, what I've seen in my own church since I came here in November of 2024, we're a historic church. We're 355 years old, literally the first church in this area. And it was a dwindled remnant congregation that was about thinking seriously of closing the church, but they said, let's try one more time. We connected through various networks that I was part of. And I came and took the call, and we've doubled the size of the congregation in just 6 months, which is very exciting to see the Lord bless a very clear, bold preaching of the gospel, right? And I mean, I would say that's the other thing that has to happen here too. We can't just preach, part A of the gospel, which is you're a sinner and you need Jesus to be saved. There's part B. Once you've been saved, you now need to go out and make disciples of all nations, teaching them to do do all that I've commanded you, right? And that command part is where the law really gets applied. There's a threefold ministry that the church is called to in its imitation of Christ: prophet, priest, and king. And the king part is where Christians are really called to engage in politics and engage in the political realm.
Well, Christianity is the only religion you can hate, right?
Well, that's true, and that's probably a tell, isn't it? That it's got something true.
Exactly. What do you think you're going to get from the Connecticut government? I mean, they're part of all this, right?
Well, I'm not holding my breath waiting for a response. Yeah. That's why I went to Bondi. That's why I've reached out to Religious Liberty Commission. I'm trying to build those networks. I'm trying to build a coalition with prayer groups and other churches in Connecticut, other pastors who are waking up, Republican town committees, Republican candidates. I'm not. This is not a partisan effort, but there is one party that's more friendly than the other, and that's just the way the reality of things are.
Sure.
Things are. And so I'm trying to change the landscape here in Connecticut, because I don't expect the politicians to lead. They're not going to stick their necks out. They've got to follow the votes, but the preachers we can stick our necks out. We can prepare the landscape. We can change the landscape. Kind of like, when you're preparing a battlefield, you go in you drop the leaflets first. You go in with the propaganda, and you try to soften up the population so that they're ready for the offensive when it comes. And I think us preachers historically in Connecticut, we preached the American Revolution. That's exactly what we did. We prepared the people for independence. And we're talking today on the eve of our 249th anniversary of our independence. So I'd like to see preachers in Connecticut do it again. I'd like to see preachers throughout New England do it again.
Wow. So we want to help with that effort.
Well, thank you.
Maybe you should think about writing like a column every now and then for the Connecticut.
Yeah, we'd love to. Thank you.
So that could be something right there, because we're totally open to that in all religions, actually. But what about money being given to the pastors? There's been some reports out recently that some churches have been taking Bitcoin and other things from certain NGOs or whatever to talk about certain things or influence populations. Have you seen any of that in your experience in Connecticut?
Well, I haven't seen that directly in terms of individual pastors being paid, but certainly when Doge first got going, we saw the data dumps from USAID, and a lot of those were going to refugee resettlement programs that were operated by Catholic Charities, Lutheran Charities, Episcopal Migration Ministry. So, I don't have the long list, the exhaustive list, and you have to check the actual detail. But what I recall is that most of the mainline denominations were getting money from the government for things like refugee resettlement, and just like advertising buys influence, I think we've got to assume that maybe there's not a quid pro quo that can be proved, but money talks.
Totally, and I think it's behind a lot of the transgender stuff too being preached. Pastor, thank you. Where can people follow you?
Well, I'm at Experimental Sermons on Substack, and then my X handle is at Jake Dell 73, and then I'm at the First Congregational Church of Woodbury. So just Google that, Woodbury, Connecticut. You'll find our webpage, and you'll find links to everything there.
Fantastic. We'll have you back. Have a great day.
Great, thank you.
Keep up the good work. Take care.